So just can't hit the table. Okay.
All right, everybody is settled? Okay. I was like, I have the great pleasure of introducing Lyria, our moderator for this panelist. Lyria is an executive IT coach right now. In a former life, she was an IT executive herself, at Verizon 2 VP level. She worked at AOL, Iron Mountain, Chubb. She's passionate. She saw, a lot of the flaws that were inherent in kind of perception of IT. They're not business people. They can't talk business. They can't talk marketing. They can't talk strategy. They're just, the techie is a techie. Lyria doesn't believe that, and she also wants to, bring that knowledge and coach others on, how to move into that kind of crossover sort of role. So she also, she does keynote speeches. This is what she does. So.
All right, thank you, Todd. Well, I know, folks, it's been a long day, and we hope that our panel discussion is going to get a little bit of excitement going between now and 45 or 55 minutes from now. I'm going to go ahead and start the timer because I'm trying to keep us on time. Sorry. And when we reach the time, after a hammer comes out, it hits me on the head. So, but the way we'll conduct this panel discussion, first of all, the topic is on how to navigate the barriers to innovation within small to large companies. And before I introduce our esteemed panel today, the way the discussion will work is I have prepared a list of questions, and I've asked the panel members to keep their responses between 1 to 2 minutes. But that doesn't mean every person is going to respond to every question. If I see that we've kind of exhausted the topic, I'll move on to the next question. I would like to keep this interactive, though, because it's not just about us. We want to hear from you as well. So if there's a question that you would like to ask the panel, or maybe there's something burning in your heart that you want to say, just raise your hand and I'll get to you as soon as I can. So again, let's try and keep it interactive. I'd like to introduce our panel, starting with Mr. Dennis Bone here, almost in the center. Dennis is the inaugural director of the Feliciano Center for Entrepreneurship, located right here in the Montclair State University. Dennis has quite the impressive background. He retired in the summer of 2012 from Verizon, New Jersey, where he served as their president and CEO for more than 12 years. In addition to several degrees, including a master's degree in counseling from the Johns Hopkins University, he has also 4 honorary doctorate degrees. Yeah, you didn't know who you were sitting next to, did you?
No. Dr. Dennis, Dr. Bone.
4 times over. In his spare time, Dennis enjoys golf and gardening. Dennis is a very strong proponent of entrepreneurialism, and we are so grateful for his influence in having this event hosted at Montclair State University today. And so with that, Dennis, could you tell us in a few sentences or so about what was the impetus for getting this all started, and where do you see this going in the next year or so?
The impetus came from several locations or several places, but basically I have a view of our economy and the marketplace evolving, and with all those major forces that's shaping everything, especially technology, global competition, that we needed to prepare students, to prepare adults to excel in this world. Innovation's a word that we throw around a lot, and I know it's part of the Q&A and part of the dialogue today, but just wanted to find a way to create more innovative opportunities, or opportunities for students to exercise their creativity, their innovation, and because it's what's needed for the future. Even in Verizon, we started talking about entrepreneurial behavior as something that was coveted inside the organization, because we were being disrupted all the time. And so the question is, who can look at this company and see where the disruption is coming from, and even disrupt ourselves. So it became a huge issue inside of Verizon, and I know Jewel is here from Verizon, who continues the disruption. So it's just something that started growing in my head, and I said yes to the opportunity.
Well, thank you. And next, we're going to introduce Amira Cummings. I hope I'm saying your name right.
You said it right.
Awesome. Amira Cummings is the president and chief strategist of A&T Brand Management, a small firm located right here in New Jersey. She's a former marketing manager of the loyalty marketing team for British Airways, where she headed the Revenue Integrity Project, valued at $168 million, focusing on loyalty programs called On Business. Amira has created strategies for brands across several industries, including health and wellness, entertainment, and fashion. She prides herself on her ability to take brands from vision to implementation in customized phases. She's also president and chief designer of Lady Cuff, a women's clothing line for professional women, which we're just embarking on. An interesting fact about Amira is that in addition to English, she also speaks Japanese, Italian, and Spanish. It's pretty impressive. Welcome, Amira.
Thank you.
I want to ask you a question as well.
Okay.
Given your background in marketing and brand management, and today we've heard a lot about entrepreneurism, for people who are just starting out with their entrepreneur track, what advice can you give them about building a strong brand?
I think the number one is patience. I find that a lot of new brands, new companies, I know we're in the technology age where everything kind of happens at the click of a button, but building a brand is really about taking steps and building it in phases and really understanding what it is that your end result should be, who it is that who is your end consumer, whether or not if you're in a technology field, understanding that other technology companies are also consumers. So you could have an end user that's an individual person, or an end user that is another larger, a Google, who's also a consumer, and really understanding how to tailor your vision through that, and having the patience and the flexibility to make sure that you can really adapt your product to whatever your end goal is. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Next, we're going to introduce Michael Liguori. And Michael Liguori is the CEO, CTO, and founder of What Are Minds For Incorporated. They provide a natural language voice control platform called Vognition for remote connected devices. We saw a little bit of a sample of kind of one of those things in the earlier, not from you, but the people that presented before you, about remotely doing something on a device. Also focused on the Internet of Things and the connected home. Michael started out as a software engineer, turning into an entrepreneur, and is now on his third startup. Michael is an NJIT computer science graduate, plus the founder and co-host of the Innovation Technology Meetup based out of NJIT's EDC Business Incubator. I asked Michael to tell me an interesting fact about him, and he told me a story about how he and some of his friends attempted to go on a scenic drive 22 miles down a dirt path at 7,200 feet altitude, and it just so happens to overlook Area 51. Well, it began to snow, and they didn't feel it was safe to move on, so they figured they'd try it another day. But I did ask Michael, were you hoping to see aliens on this journey? And he said, no, Lyria, remember, the aliens are underground. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you a question as well. Given that this is your third startup, and again, we have people here today who are interested in doing a similar thing, what advice can you give to people who have an idea to get started, but they're just not quite sure, what's the first thing I do? What do I do?
You gotta start asking people about your idea. You can't be afraid to just internalize it and just keep it to yourself. You have to get that feedback from other people. You have to reach out to who could be your target customer to kind of foster your idea. You may not have the right idea right away, and there might be a couple more steps that you have to get to. But you won't be able to validate that until you actually get this into either the hands of your customers or someone that really finds it interesting. And then the next step is, after you find people who are interested, is finding the right people that help you get there. So it's really about fostering the idea, finding the right customers, and creating the right team. And if you can do that, then you can get the rest of the way.
Thank you. And finally, I'm going to introduce Carlos Abad. Carlos is a financial planner who specializes in working with business owners, entrepreneurs, and aspiring entrepreneurs. He is co-founder of the Launch NJ Meetup Group, and actively supports other tech events such as the one we're attending here today. You know, Malcolm Gladwell says that there's a very select group of people responsible for the tipping point of all great ideas. And when I think about Carlos, I think of him being the big connector because he really embodies the persona of connecting people with ideas. Carlos is passionate about tech startups, and he's committed to building a vibrant entrepreneurial community right here in New Jersey. I asked him one time, what is your goal, Carlos? He says, just like New York and just like San Francisco and Austin and all these other places, I want New Jersey on the map when it comes to tech startups. So that is quite the altruistic goal, but he is definitely on his path to doing that. Carlos, can you tell me a little bit about LaunchNJ and what do you see for the next 6 months to a year?
How many people were here when I talked before, so I won't bore you again with that aspect of it? Okay, cool. I'm going to change it a little bit then. I really think that New Jersey is getting close to what I consider a tipping point. We have so much great activity, and I can tell you that besides us having this event here, which Dennis Bone facilitated, we got a jewel by having Dennis here. We're very lucky in that he allows us to kind of have this idea and create it. And that's what startup is. That's what entrepreneurialism is really about. So I think that New Jersey has a plethora of people who are actually interested in this and passionate about it. And now we're finally starting to get the different pieces. A lot of times entrepreneurs here they want investors. There's pieces that have to happen before that. And I really see it happening right now where we're getting to that point. And an important part is that everybody in this room, if you are passionate about that, creating buzz increases the amount of activity, increases the amount of focus, increases the developers, increases the investors. So the biggest thing that I could say from being here is for you people to talk about this event, talk about what's going on in Montclair State. And if you do that, we're going to get there regardless. You're just going to accelerate the process of getting there.
Thank you, Carlos. So now we're going to shift into our topic. But first, I'd like a show of hands. How many of you folks are working for a corporation versus saying being on your own or solopreneur or something like that? Again, so a good number of us. So hopefully this topic will be relevant for you, and we want to hear from you about your experiences and your career history. So I'm going to start with you, Dennis, with our first question. And this is on the topic of innovation and corporate executives having the desire to innovate. And we know that that's true. We know that you have to innovate or die, as they say in these days. But the reality is that executives are constrained by limited resources. They need to meet short-term requirements. You know, the board is expecting earnings per share and those kind of things that they're monitoring from year to year. So given these constraints, how can companies develop a culture of innovation that takes a longer-term view of ROI and makes research and development an integral part of their business?
Well, I would just simply say that those companies that plan to survive and thrive have to innovate, which is kind of part of the assumption of your question is that you're either going to innovate or you're going to die. So the question is, does the leadership of the corporation understand that? Because it's not in the share owner's interest to die, right?
Right.
So you can die a quick death or you can die a slow death of never innovating and letting your your competitors through technology and innovative programs take all your customers. But a lot of companies don't get it, but many do, and they just have to understand the world that we're in. I mean, it's that simple. If you cannot see Moore's Law and what it does with technology, doubling the processing power, having the cost every 18 months, and seeing all the technology. I mean, this room, just think what you've seen today. Think about what Google does, or Amazon does, or Apple does, or any of the technology companies, especially all the millions of little small ones. They're at where technology is disrupting companies, where that disruption is taking place. That's where all the entrepreneurs, that's where they are. Because that's where they can see, wow, I can take on Verizon in this space because they're not acting quick enough. This technology is really ripe right now. I can be lean and mean and do that quickly and, you know, and jump into that space. So, I mean, if any company doesn't see that or
Yeah.
doesn't appreciate living in that world, then they're going to die anyway. So I think it comes down to leadership. They have to know that innovation is not something you can skimp on.
So let me ask you a follow-up question, particularly about Verizon, because I think that's still fresh in your mind. It's just been a couple of years since you retired. I recently had the privilege to interview Roger Gurnani, and that will be appearing on my blog at some point when I edit it. But at any rate, he talked a lot about the culture and the intentional culture to shift IT's thinking to be more business savvy and customer focused. Can you talk up to that a little bit?
Any company, whether it's Verizon or any company that doesn't put the customer in the center of their circle, again, is going to die. So I would say that AT&T and the Verizons and some of the legacy telephone companies, and I lived there, I was there for, you know, lots of decades.
Yeah.
You know, at one point were pretty much engineering driven. You know, whatever Bell Labs developed is what you took to the marketplace. And like the best example is picture phone. AT&T came up with picture phone in the 1970s, took it to the marketplace, and it died. Nobody wanted it, right? It was a technology in the 70s that nobody wanted. Was it an innovative technology? Yes. But they lost connection with what Michael's talking about, the customer. So I think any company that puts customers and innovation in the middle, you know, are going to make right decisions.
Yes. To our other panel members, any thoughts from you on making a commitment in corporate America to making innovation part of the culture?
It's funny because you can slice and dice this in a lot of different angles. And one of the ways that I kind of look at entrepreneurism, it's not only about like creating a vibrant entrepreneurial community in New Jersey. That's cool and we definitely do need it. But beyond that, if you really think about one of the things that's become very common conversation is this whole concept of a flatter organization. So why do we want a flatter organization? Some of the CEOs, all they want is to decrease the cost. But there's actually more than that. You want to make the communication easier. You want to be able to understand your clients, all of this part. But if you're really going to go from a flat organization, it means that you're leaving the hierarchical structure. So it's not going from top to down. That means that you have to have these people at the lower level, at the customer level, that they actually can think on their own. That they can sit there and say, you know what, instead of me sitting here complaining at the water cooler, I have a solution, I'm going to bring it forward, and I'm going to say, look at this. This is something that can help your business. And that is something that goes beyond just doing an entrepreneurial community. That goes to the idea of people who are currently getting displaced and looking for work. If you can develop the entrepreneurial mentality, then that is where we all of a sudden, everyone benefits, including the person who's looking for the job, large corporate America, and the entrepreneur who wants to start a startup. So to me, it's about having an entrepreneurial mentality that's really, whether you're in corporate America, whether you're in a small business, that will make the difference for yourself personally or for big corporations.
I'm going to ask the audience, for the ones that are in corporate America or have been in corporate America, have you seen an entrepreneurial spirit as Carlos is describing?
Not as much as there should be. The biggest challenge I've seen is reward system. The reward system is not there in most companies. You bring in an idea and you make it successful. There is no clearly defined what's in it for you, right? So I think that's where the companies that are successful are the ones who define the reward structure very well.
Okay.
You know, again, I worked in many different areas, and I worked primarily in sales. In sales, you know, there is a reward structure defined. You know, if you sell more, you're going to get more commissions. And I see people putting 200% effort in that.
I'm going to get to you just a second. I believe you had your hand up as well.
I did. From my point of view, one of corporate failures is that unfortunately the people within the structure have a fear of failure. A fear of failure on several or many levels. And the biggest one, of course, is off with their own head. Because they're comfortable in a job, they have a position, they know they're going to keep working and they're doing a great job. But I think very often they're afraid, gee, I have a great idea or someone brought a great idea to me. If I bring it forward, and God forbid it fails, I'm doomed. So I'm just going to stay comfortable as is.
That's an excellent point, and we're going to touch on that in just a little bit in one of my questions. So,
By the way, excuse me,
glad you brought
I
that
see
up.
that in the educational system as well, not just corporate environment.
Okay. And the gentleman in the back in the blue and white shirt.
I'm very passionate about innovation. I started a company called Boundless Innovations, and a scholarship writing about it. One of the things that, as to have to further discuss what you said, is companies sometimes, once you work for them, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, we don't have a right to our inventions, but a lot of times companies will say, you work here, you own nothing, you get rewarded for nothing. I know a 74-year-old worker who made a company $50 million with this invention, and he gave him a $300 bonus. He can't afford to retire. You know, it's about teamwork, it's about sharing, it's about giving. And if you create an invention for a company that makes them $1 billion or $100 million, I think they should give you a nice raise or maybe a little piece of the action. And that would create more of an incentive for innovation. And also,
So sorry.
and traditionally, Harvard did a study on open innovation and how that really, when companies consider the ideas of others, they're more profitable. But growing up as a kid, even Verizon in 2002, I had these ideas of creating mobile apps, and I wrote to Verizon Supplier Relations, and they wrote back saying we can't accept unsolicited ideas. I wrote to AT&T, we can't accept unsolicited ideas. Getting in the door was 10 times harder than thinking of a new invention that I won an award for. And there needs to be doors open and for collaboration to exist. And IP theft is another issue. Over $400 billion a year is lost to our economy because of intellectual property theft and people not getting credit for their work. And CNBC did a report, $300 million a year is lost to inventors because of unethical companies. The key to innovation is ethics and incentivizing people to be innovative. Maybe give them a raise, maybe give them a 1% licensing deal. Don't take 100% of the rights away and give them a $200 bonus if they make a company $100 million. And I think we need to reward innovators and everyone in the company to be innovative and to get credit for your work and maybe a bonus or a raise or something. Don't all their inventor rights away. I knew an engineer who gave up teaching because the university wanted to own all his inventions and he could barely afford to live and with a family at a $65,000 salary.
Okay.
I'm just saying we've got to reward innovators more.
Thank you.
Just passionate about the topic.
Yeah, so we appreciate that. All right, I'm going to change the topic a little bit, just in interest of getting to our other topic areas. And I'm going to start with you, Amira. That's okay. I want to talk about tech startups compete to get selected for incubators. As you can attest to, Michael, you were in an incubator there at NJIT. They get selected for incubators or accelerators because they feel that if they can get in those programs, they have a much better chance of having a viable product, bringing it to market. How can corporate America adopt some of these incubator and accelerator mindsets, or strategies, so that we can be more successful inside corporations to bring products to fruition?
I think that actually touches on the last question as well, as far as the innovate or die within a huge company. I do think that it's twofold. I think one, it's the fear from the top. Okay, so let me gather myself first. I think there's a huge dynamic shift, especially in the tech world, as far as the incubator situation, just because we're seeing what new technology can do for a company to change the entire dynamic, to rebrand.
Me coming out of corporate America, we go in a back room for 6 months and start writing requirements. Maybe we talk to the business partner well enough to understand those requirements, maybe we don't. But 6 months to a year later, we say, here's your new system, and they say, really? That's what you're delivering? How is it that we can harness some of the best practices from tech startups into corporate America to be more successful at delivering quality software that end users really embrace?
Okay, thank you. So I think that a lot of it is the openness of collaboration and accepting of new ideas.
Okay.
I think that what I was trying to get at the first time when I said about fear, I think accepting new ideas from the top down is very hard because you don't absolutely have the test market. You don't know exactly what it's going to do. You do have those procedures in place, but it's more of where is it going to affect the bottom line. When you go from a smaller, kind of less, a smaller company, it's easier to take risks. It's easier to say, okay, we're gonna try this, because like I said, when you build a brand, it's in phases. It's
Yeah.
so much easier to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 than it is to go from large corporation with an already established brand,
Yeah.
within a customer base, with employees and a bottom line that they have to, and shareholders, to actually kind of reel it back and really accept that.
Okay.
So I do think that if something off to the side, as far as the incubators, where it's not so much embedded in the bottom line, where you
Yes.
don't feel the fear.
Yes.
Where you don't feel the risk, and it's not, you're not sweating when you go
Right.
into it, so that you can actually kind of streamline it as something new, as something innovative, so that the rest of your company can survive. So that's what
So
I'm
that,
really
that's a
trying
really
to-
good point, because I have another question later on that talks about, the mantra of fail fast. So we're
Right.
going to come back to that topic.
I have something to follow up with that. I think that corporations, they have their own, sometimes venture programs that are hosted by corporate, by their corporate. So they'll have their own little venture firm that they'll go and they'll host other entrepreneurial companies to try to pull them in. But what happens if they were to foster more entrepreneurship by getting their own intrapreneurs to go out into communities like this, coming to different events and meetups and trying to meet entrepreneurs that are trying to create new development and new growth? What happens if they were to push them to be advisors on these other startups, because they realize this is a company that we should bring in, that maybe we could do a mergers and acquisitions with in the future, but we just have to figure out how to get these guys in here. They maintain their low profile for their business model. They maintain the use of using the entrepreneur as sort of like sweat equity, because the entrepreneur is going to go out and do what they want to do with passion, and they're going to be able to get that vibrantness, and they're going to be able to create that core team to pull them in. If corporations were to recognize that this is a really large advantage, that they could get a hold of an opportunity for them to help foster entrepreneurship, they could eventually use accelerators and incubators as a hosting tank, where they could have a money put away for certain incubators in a certain technology chain. And then when that entrepreneurial group gets far enough, they could end up bringing them into the whole corporation, because it fits right into their business model already, and that's already been worked out. There's a lot of things that I think that corporations can do, especially with acting as advisors for early stage companies.
So actually, you were the lead person into the next question, which was for you, actually, and you
Oh.
kind of pre-answered it, which is great. But the question was, tech startups seem to move at a much faster pace to get products out the door, whereas larger companies, we've got a lot of red tape, rules, processes, architectural things that we have to consider, bureaucracy that slows people down. What is it about tech startups from a cultural perspective that allows them, I'm changing the question because you
Culture.
kind of answered the other one. So what is it about tech startups culturally that allows them to move faster?
Culturally, they don't give up. They'll see something that comes out that might be a direct competition for them, but they'll look into it more and find out how that's not really the solution. Like, I gave an example when Siri first came out in 2011, and I was like, oh my God, it's over. I can't believe this came out. And then I'm like, wait a second, people will actually understand what I'm talking about now, because
Very
they're
different.
handling, generating the awareness. So it's recognizing that there's that sudden fear that I might not make it, but then realizing I need to take a second look at this, just breathe for a moment, and figure out why it's not really a solution in the marketplace, and how there still is a position for you as an entrepreneur, and to figure out why you still have a position and how to move forward. So that never say die.
Yeah.
Is that Goonies too?
Any thoughts from our audience?
Yeah, I mean, just following up with what gentleman here said, the incentive model is very different, that's one. The other is that when there is a problem, the startups are very easily able to pivot and move in a certainly a different direction, where if they were in a corporation, it would take them 6 months to get approval from all the managing directors and steering committees before anything can happen.
So that's a great point. Dennis, can I ask you about your experience at Verizon when it was time to pivot?
Sure. I would say don't underestimate the resourcefulness of large corporations. I would say at Verizon and Basking Ridge, you know, like one day Gartner is in there for 3 or 4 hours telling the right team about what they see in terms of innovation and what the trends are and where things are going. We have a venture arm that funded about 25 startups a year, you know, teams of people that were always out within the startup community, seeing what's going on in especially the mobile app space or in the security space or how to get some product or idea across multiple platforms. So I think if you think that large corporations are disconnected from the community, I think that's a bad assumption on your part. That doesn't answer the question, but I think it's an assumption that some people have, because large corporations have a lot of resources to connect in very real and very tangible ways to technology and what's going on. I mean, for example, I've been there. You know, it's like we wanted, you know, what's Intel going to be doing for the next 3 years? Who did we have in? We had Andy Grove in when Andy was CEO of Intel. So then Andy would share his view of what Intel's going to be doing for the next 3 or 4 years. You know, and to be in that audience is, you know, is pretty special.
Right.
So now the question is on time. And there, yes, there are issues there. But a lot of those issues aren't around, is it a good idea? Or is this something we're going to do? And again, putting on my Verizon hat, the issue is, how are we going to get this out to 100 million cell phone company or users on a platform that's reliable, that we can send it out to 100 million users and not tie up call centers for days and create really bad customer experiences.
Right.
So it has to be vetted and scaled in a way that you can do it to huge masses of customers.
Right.
That takes time.
Yeah.
And that's why large corporations aren't as nimble.
Yeah.
I don't think it's because they're not thinking at the margin of where technology is and where it's going. I think it's about how do you do it to 100 million customers.
Because you may introduce a whole another problem that you didn't intend to.
Brand, you know, brand is everything.
Yeah.
You screw up big time, and you ding your brand, you know, hard to recover.
That's right. Was there another comment?
I think, you know, something else that you all haven't touched upon still is ownership and passion of the ideas. You can't replicate that in big corporation versus startup. No matter how deep the pockets are at Verizon, no matter how much intelligence you gather,
Good point.
you can set up an incubator. You can put the employees of Verizon in an incubator for 6 months with all the best intelligence and all the resources in the world, and you'll never match the passion and ownership of any startup, simply because it's not theirs. They're working for somebody else, and at the end, it won't be theirs. Certainly they will have pride, and you have pride. You still speak about your experience at Verizon with pride. You can hear it, and you can feel it. And I think that most everybody in this room will speak with their experience at any company they've worked at with pride. For the most part, we all have one or at least one experience somewhere along the way that, you know, that probably kicked to the curb. But you can never match the passion and ownership of your entrepreneurial experience, which equates to the startup. And I think that's where the startup is agile and quick and will do whatever it takes, like Mike said, and will go beyond and further and will outwit and will accomplish more in less time, and less resources, and less money, and in the end win.
Okay, I'm going to take one more comment, and then we need to get to the next question. You had your hand up for a while.
I was. My name is Stephanie. I represent the NJT Incubator on campus, and we're taking a stab at it. We created the Innovation Institute as a conduit for emerging technologies that are happening, say, at nearby corporations like Panasonic. And so we'll see what happens. We're fostering collaboration, but it's happening. We're going to take a stab at it and see where it goes.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to the next topic, which is really kind of touching on some of the things that we just discussed. Carlos, I'm going to direct this one at you, and let's talk about where innovation comes from within a company, within a corporation. In many companies, a person's title determines how their message is valued and how much attention is given to their ideas. Not in all cases, but in some cases. But when we consider building a culture of innovation, we've got to find a way to tap into the intrapreneurs. And I heard, Michael, you use that word earlier today. These are the employees inside the company who are self-motivated, the free thinkers, masters at navigating around the political inertia just to get things done. How do you suggest that we harvest the ideas and the energy of these intrapreneurs? Kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier.
The truth is, from watching some big corporations, I'm not even sure if it makes sense, at least by the existing models that I've seen. It's almost like what Dennis was saying, you're an entrepreneur, you don't care about failing. You'll just start over, pivot, iterate, go forward. You're a big corporation, you fail, it's like, oh, you failed. So it's kind of like what I envision is, even the concept of, you have startups pitching at your corporation. You set up a time where anybody who's got this fantastic idea will go in there and pitch. And right away it says, oh yeah, sure, that's cool. But then what happens if you lose this really great developer because now he wants to go do a startup? And it's like, that sucks. We lost one of the top guys. So maybe it's a matter of really creating this external entity which isn't attached, that you support, and you'll have some level of vested interest. And then if they actually succeed, okay, I'm going to bet on these guys, I'll put money behind them and I'll go forward, as opposed to really trying to keep it within, which can work with from an iteration perspective, but not from a big, bold idea and pivoting perspective. So to me, it's kind of like, it just is too big, there's too much stuff, it's too difficult. You have to worry about your reputation, you have to worry about all these things, whereas a startup, you don't. And as a startup, if you're working your 80 hours a week, you're gonna make it. If it's supposed to, if you're working 40 hours a week, you're getting paid for 40, you're working for 80, you're still getting paid for 40.
Right.
So it's kind of like where I kind of feel as if maybe if they would switch it, where you take it off the books, you let it blossom, and then you will, but you gotta be willing to lose people and be willing to take that dive, and that's something that I think corporations are just not built to do, and not at least at this stage.
Any thoughts on that from our panel? Audience?
I have a kind of question actually. So is there any program in the US where, let's say if a company buys a product from a startup, they get some benefits, so they promote buying products or services from a startup rather than going to big names? Like what I see is we are a tech startup, right, and companies feel comfortable when they see a name like IBM or Microsoft or Oracle versus a small startup name. There is no incentive to go to a small startup name, though they might be cheaper, faster, better, much more efficient solution. It's less risk-averse nature of people to go with established brand name companies, right? So is there any kind of, I don't know, just I'm just asking questions, like is there a policy, or companies can make a policy kind of saying that, if you buy it from startup, we're going to give you some benefits because of that. Is there anything like that?
Well, again, I don't want to talk too much about Verizon, but so Verizon does have a venture capital arm. It makes investments, small investments in lots of startups every year, especially in the spaces that are related to our key areas, or Verizon's key areas. I'm not there anymore, so I can't say our. But to programs, so whatever we would do at Verizon in this space, and a lot of times our major contracts, we would give rewards for especially minority and women-owned businesses, whether they're startups or whether they ran a cleaning company. But many of our contracts were huge. It might be a contract for, $100 million. Then we would always write into those contracts about the tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, that would have to contribute, that contract, if it's given to, let's say, a Lucent, 20% of that contract would have to go to smaller, diverse companies.
Does someone have a question? The one right? And we're going to try and keep our responses shorter now because we just have 10 minutes left. And I have a few more questions to get through.
I'm going to throw out a question there to the audience. Is it natural, corporations by their structure or are treated like human beings by the tax code system. So isn't it maybe that they're meant to die and go through their cycle? Are we really trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, where maybe it's a natural thing for companies to go through their cycle, die, and a new company to come in and fill it? I really looking at it, I think that may be it, because you're going to be that startup. Why would they take a chance on you if you may go out of business because you're a new company? Now they've invested this time and this effort in you, and now all of a sudden, because you're a startup, you go out of business. So
Yeah, it's a catch-22, right? It's a catch-22, but I still think startups are much, much more nimble.
agree.
Because I've been with 3 startups and we competed against big names, and where our competitors would bring in an army of people to do the same thing, would bring like 2 guys, and in like 1 or 2 weeks we are done, versus that army of people wouldn't do that in 2 months, right? So it was the, I think so it's a catch-22 where you have to really prove, and as a startup you have to prove a lot more to be successful. But when you prove it, you know, even if the initial ramp up is difficult, first let's say 5 or 10 customers is the difficult part.
But now you become this super big company, and you have to hire people, you're trusting, and now all of a sudden that startup that you hired goes out of business, because startups tend to go out of business a lot more.
So there are 2 things that are happening. I see startups either get acquired by bigger companies, okay, rather than getting out of business, number 1, or they have to change the direction. Most startups that are not able to make it, they are quick enough to change the direction. Unless, when we say go out of, they fail, I find it, a lot of them fail in one idea, but they succeed in another idea.
Pivot.
So, I'm sorry, gentlemen, can you just give us your comment?
Do you want to finish first, or should I speak?
Did you have something about the topic we're on?
Comment, not notification.
I guess just keep going on us.
Okay, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. It's kind of a lead-in actually to this question. I'm gonna go a little bit faster, panel, just because we're running close to our time. Some people would say that we are in the second tech bubble. I don't know how true that is, but venture capital dollars invested reached $4 billion this past year for the first time since the year 2000. That's a lot of tech investment dollars. Yet many companies are reticent to use these newer technologies, as we were talking about earlier, because of fear of, are those tech startups going to be around for the long haul? But we can't just not do anything. What are some of the things that corporate America could do to maybe hedge their bets? To say we're going to bring in these newer technologies, but we're going to reduce the risk as much as we can.
I think focusing on the end user as far as which technologies you're going to bring in. I've been noticing as far as the tech investment, I do think we're in another bubble. Everyone's looking for the next Facebook, they're looking for the next Google, they're looking for the next Instagram, and the fact that we keep getting them, 4 years down the road, everyone's like, okay, I want this to be the next one. Mm-hmm. But what I've been noticing in tech is that as far as the ones that fail versus the ones that succeed, is that we're taking the technology and we're just kind of like looping it all together. Like, this looks good, let me pull from here, I can build that, this looks good. And it's kind of giving the end user too much, too soon. Because we're afraid to just scale one bit at a time. And if you focus on your end user, whether it's Verizon, your end user is the person using that telephone. Mm-hmm. They may not need every single thing you guys have to offer right now. So if you can scale that out, and now I can get used to just using this, and this is the Verizon network, now I'm going to be open to the next technology that you introduce.
So I'm going to ask you a question and open to the panel as well. I know in my years, more recently as a VP, end users are now empowered because of cloud and some of these other newer technologies. They can go take their credit card and get Salesforce.com going up in their area. They don't even need IT to do that. How do we respond to that and still have some semblance that we do have an architecture we're trying to adhere to, but trying to keep our customer base happy at the same time?
From my point of view, and especially look at Google, look at Facebook, look at Microsoft and all the acquisitions they've made. A lot of it is is you want to get a certain technology or a certain edge over your competitor, and you'll pay a very high price to get that. I mean, you'll take that company off the table because you don't want your competitor to get it, especially if they got a bunch of really creative people. And I would say many of the acquisitions that are out there are for the people, not for maybe the product. You know, they just see a bunch of really smart, innovative people that's executing and say, wow, you know, let's make them part of our team. So, I mean, I think everything's very strategic that way. I think these decisions about who do we buy and what do we do with them when we buy them is I don't know if they're good decisions or not. I'm just saying they're thought through pretty thoroughly.
Any other thoughts from our panel?
I'm going to have one quick thought, and I'll be real fast because I tend to pontificate. As far as I don't think we are in a tech bubble, and the real simple reason why I don't think we are is pretty much the concept of lean startup. Before, the way that things were done pre-tech bubble, you had this idea, you built this humongous structure, and then all of a sudden you realize that nobody was there. What's happening right now is that people are having an idea, they create an MVP, they build it up, and they're customizing it. So even though we're not sure if Facebook may fail in 2 or 3 years because it's getting displaced by Google Plus or whoever it may be, it's still a matter that these companies now have actually built this infrastructure as they're building up. So that's why I don't see it being like before, where all of a sudden they had these big ideas, everyone invested all this money, there was no substance, there was no users, and then it crashed. So that's just kind of where I kind of view it a little bit different from that.
To go back to what Amira said earlier about making sure that they talk to their customer, assuming that the MVP is ready, they have something that they've shown to their customer. If Intrapreneurs, a part of the corporation, can become advisors of these startups and really pay attention to what they're doing, finding out the market information, really seeing the nuts and bolts of how they're working, maybe that would be a faster track way to bring these other startups in to vet them before they actually assume any major risk of deploying it. That's really what it's about. It's like risk versus reward. Is this startup really ready? How are we going to vet them?
You guys are such a great panel because you're leading into my next question and my next question. So it's good that we're all on the same page. So my next question really, Carlos, if you could talk a little bit about minimally viable products. And, you know, I was saying earlier, from my corporate experience, at any rate, you know, we go into a back room for months and we develop requirements, and then we land something on the end user's desk and they say, that's not what I asked for, that's not meeting my business need. So when we talk about failing fast and failing often, I know that these are lean startup principles and this whole thing about minimal viable product. Could you talk to that a little bit, and why does that work in lean startups and why couldn't it work in corporate America?
It could work in corporate America, but just the whole idea is that if you're looking to start a company, what happens is that you have all these massive ideas in your head. You have all these different things that you think that the public wants, and the truth is you have no clue until you put it out there. So the first thing that you really have to do is break it down to the simplest, most basic thing that you can have. And once you have that, you put that out there, you test it. If it works, then you start adding all the widgets to it, as opposed to the other process where you have this big concept, you build it, and then you hope they come. So to me, that's very basic. By just going through that exercise of narrowing it down to the most viable, minimal thing, it's going to help you be a better entrepreneur. It's going to help you think through your whole process better. And then after that, then you start building it up. So.
And so what mindset then needs to shift in corporate America to embrace that?
It's extremely difficult. Like, you know, obviously if you get lucky and you have a guy like Dennis, it's going to be a lot better. But I've been on the other side and I've seen a lot of the corporate America. And you have to be willing to take that chance. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to lose that employee because all of a sudden he's going to leave your company to start there. And that is a whole lot of risk as opposed to, you know, innovation's dilemma where you disrupt a space where nobody wants it, you become really good, and then when something changes demographically or technology-wise and it blows up, you're fitted like a glove around them, you can blow up with them and the big guys can't adapt. So that's kind of where I don't know the answer to the large corporate America, how they adapt to it. Dennis is better than that than me.
I think the reality is, or here's one of the realities. How many startups in here would love to get noticed by Facebook or Google or Apple or Microsoft? I mean, wouldn't you love to get that call and say, hey, I found out what you're doing, you know, I want to talk to you? I mean, that's the dream call, right?
Right.
So what goes on for these large companies, these large tech companies, people are pinging them day in, day out, can you notice me? Or in Verizon's case, we have 2 research centers, one in San Francisco, one up in the Boston area, where we bring technologists in all the time and work with them. So it doesn't have to happen inside the corporation. If you have partnerships and you have programs where you work with startups, you're going to get some of the same benefits regardless. And the other assumption is, in many cases, that startup guy, I mean, Mike, would you, after 3 startups, would you want to go work for a large corporation? I don't know what your answer would be, but a lot of startups say, no, I want to work for myself. I'm not cut out. So it's a complex area.
I actually do come from a corporation background, worked on military radios and waveforms, so you can't get more processed than a subcontractor of government. So I do know the
But
environment.
now you know the freedom of a startup.
I do, and it's definitely a duality of what I would end up choosing. So it's a little bit of a conundrum. If you were to have a mergers and acquisitions, how long would the founder stay with that core team before they end up saying, do I go on to my next startup, or do I stay here because I like the corporation that I'm working for?
And most founders I know who signed that 18-month agreement with the large company, they can't wait for that 18 months to be over so they can get out. I mean, that's the real world.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I say something to that?
Sure.
I think as far as the question of who would want to be noticed by a Facebook or a Google, I think it really all goes back to you understanding your end user or what the product is, the purpose of it as you move forward. Because if all you want to do is to develop something and you say, all right, this is my first company, I'm going to develop this piece of technology, I'd really love for it to be noticed by Google and to sell it and potentially get some experience on that end so that I can go and do the next thing. It's in order for you to get that call back or in order for you to become noticed, you still have to understand what the brand is that you're building from the beginning. So you really have to, it has to be something of value. Like for instance, Instagram was something of value. It wasn't particularly, it was brilliant, but it wasn't something that you couldn't do or you couldn't do or someone, we could all build an Instagram, but it's a matter of they understood their end user. They understood it was just a world of people out there who wants to take pictures. And they built a platform, and the platform was of value. So if you can build something of value that is brilliant to your end user, whether they understand the back end of it, then you can become noticed by a Google or a Facebook. And then you get to make the decision of whether or not you want to be a part of a corporation, or if you say, you know what, I've done it this far on my own, I can get even further. So it really does go back to thinking about who is my end user and how do I give them what they want so that they can see the value, as opposed to just kind of like giving it all out there, hoping that someone notices me for something that I've done. If you make it valuable, like they said, if you build it, they will come. If you build it correctly and people actually want what you have to offer, then they will come.
Well, to wrap things up, I'd like to pose a question to our audience. Based on what you heard from our panel today and from those who asked questions or gave comments, for those of you that are in corporations, when you go back tomorrow or next week or next month, what takeaways that you heard today do you think that you would like to at least give some thought to implementing within your company? Somebody's got to answer it. Look, I got prizes down here. First person that gives me a good answer. A good answer. Come on.
What if you don't work for a corporation?
Well, you can contribute anyway. You can contribute anyway. I'll get to you second, Todd. Gentleman here in the blue and white.
First thing is, throughout history, I'm going to talk a little bit. Throughout history, less than 5% of patents commercialized, 80% of businesses, small businesses go out of business in 18 months, Small Business Administration, Bloomberg. We need to, in the Drudge Report of President Obama that Rodney developed, they said less than 50% of college graduates are finding good jobs. Another study came out that about 45% of Americans have a full-time job. we really need to help startups grow and improve. And I love what he said about, I forgot your name.
Mike.
Corporate startup incubations, where corporations team up with startups rather than view everything as competition, but as collaboration and cooperation and win-win deals and have ethics and reward innovators. And what I take away from this panel is the things I learned, as you said, getting a big corporation, taking up with the little guys, the innovation's dilemma, being more open, and like Dennis said, you know, Verizon has a venture capital arm. The big companies know more than we think, and we should never criticize them, but I think it's easier to get past some red tape. And it's tearing down that red tape that Harvard Business Review discussed is the key. Open innovation makes companies and when people collaborate, it makes everyone succeed.
Thank you, great answer, and you'll get the T-shirt afterward.
But I did have a question for the panel. I read in Inc. magazine, entrepreneurs are 60% less likely to get hired. Like sometimes being an entrepreneur is lonely, sometimes it's not stable income, and sometimes you want to get the hell out. Or would you say from Verizon, is Verizon likely to hire an entrepreneur, or do they want someone who worked at AT&T for 4 years, then Sprint for 3 years? Does the entrepreneur have any chance to get out of the entrepreneurship cycle and get
They hired this guy.
Well, he started at a startup.
Yeah, I started at.
Jugel, so I was.
Oh,
Point.
Well, I didn't work at a startup, so I probably can't speak to that question.
Just wondering, does Verizon hire entrepreneurs often, or they'd rather hire people with corporate experience?
Well, I actually do have something about that. So while I was working and then not working and just working 24/7 on What Are Mines For, I did go back to work for a corporation. It was ITT. I got hired through an agency for them. Now, it was for 6 months, but I actually had the choice of whether or not do I want to talk to the guys that I'm working with and see if they would want to keep me on. I got some hints that the answer would have been yes, but I made the choice to continue with What Are Mines For. So, you know, I did have an opportunity because they vetted me through a contracting firm for a certain period of time. So there are other ways for them to vet an entrepreneur than just picking them up and not wondering if they're just going to, you know, how long they're going to be there for. So there needs to be a level of understanding of the duration of time that that person will be there, but at least have a pivot point to say, is he going to stay, is he not going to stay? And at least the corporation knows that in advance.
Does Verizon hire entrepreneurs often, or is it more people in corporate?
Well, what we do, or when I was there, what we did is we would say, okay, we're going to hire 100 programmers that have this background, this knowledge, know these languages, and are competent in these areas. And we would we would advertise and go through our headhunters to find those 100 developers, you know, in their certain area. Now, are they entrepreneurs? Some of them, yes, some of them, no. So I would say we weren't, quote, targeting entrepreneurs. We were targeting, in this case, coders, or maybe a digital marketing, you know, some SEO expert or something like that. So we would put out on the street the characteristics and the skills that we were looking to hire. Again, I'm not sure if they were entrepreneurs or not. They had skills that we're looking for. That was the bottom line.
Okay, I'm ready to shift back to our topic. Todd, we were talking about takeaways from today.
Oh, sorry, I was going the other way.
What way?
Well, I mean, I just wanted to say, like, not to like, you know, crush any dreams or whatever, but to me, in a lot of cases, people, you know, you want to take it away, you want to bring that back to your company and say, hey, I'm going to change this. I think a lot of times it's just not in a company's DNA. You know, they're not innovative by nature. It comes down from the top. You know, there's some entrenched financial company that, you know, when they rose up, when, you know, what they made their money on, what they based their foundation on, it had nothing to do with technology. You know, it was before the computer era. And I'm yet to see too many companies really make that transition. I mean, to me, that DNA that comes down from, you know, CEO executives is so influential. It just trickles down from one to the next and the next. And I mean, I personally, I witnessed it. I've seen a whole lot of companies that they just don't really care about innovation, and even if they do, they don't go about it the right way. They don't get it. You know, they don't understand software development. To me, is one of the biggest ones. I mean, software development, like, you don't get that. It's not like, you know, lining up some stickers to have, you know, posters to have delivered for a conference. It's, you might go down a path for, you know, 3 weeks. You might dump 1,000 hours into something that was totally the wrong approach. You know, some new technology came up over here, and that was just a waste of time, and they don't get that.
Yeah.
I think that, to me, that's the biggest dilemma. You know, when you have the wrong person, the wrong group right at the top, I haven't seen too many cases where a company's gotten over that. I don't know, maybe other people have seen something else, but I haven't.
Okay. A few more comments. I'm going to take the gentleman in the back row. We haven't heard from you yet.
What he said, I worked in one company that tried to set a startup inside the company to change an advertising firm to a digital marketing firm, and the digital side was completely separate. We had one sponsor on the executive committee. We had 9 other executives that wanted us dead because they had no control over us. We lost the political fight. So they was heading in the right direction, but they couldn't protect us. And it's like you said, they don't want to change. They see their money coming from one place, and they're
making a ton of money on something that, you know, doesn't need that newest innovation. They're entrenched. They have the contracts.
Yep, and then it dries up, and the company closes.
Eventually dries up, then they eat your lunch, but yeah.
Yep.
Was there another comment? John?
I mean, I've worked with, I've been basically in and out of startups and back into the corporate world and then out again to do startups. What my experience is somewhat different. You know, I work for established banks where they basically have spun out the technology which was built as a separate company, and that went in and did some security work in the industry. And also, they are, you know, there is a inherent understanding that if they don't innovate, they are going to get slowly die. So they are starting to encourage, and they are actually hiring people, innovative, you know, people who have a startup mentality, to come in and head certain amount of projects, certain parts of the organization. They don't want to do it in their established money-making business. It's the business they want to go in, but yet they are not willing to put in a lot of money in that direction because they don't want to get distracted. They want to get their you know, feet wet a little bit and play with it, and they will go and, you know, seed internally a group and say, okay, you know, you guys go ahead and play with it. Like, I think example might be Verizon. Verizon, I think, when they didn't really go into cloud technology until they decided that this is an established market, and now they should go out and buy Termark, for example, right? So
Exactly.
it's, you know,
It's a great example.
The large companies do not want to take a risk unless they see the market has developed, and that's when they will go in. At that time, it's much cheaper for them to buy somebody rather than to go and seed every other new technology which is coming up. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think a lot of the corporations don't, you know, spend a lot of time innovating internally. But they are realizing, I think some companies are realizing that they have to do it, and they are doing it right now.
Okay.
That's my experience so far.
Okay, thank you. We'll take one last comment.
I just have a question, since today is all about Google. How does Google work from that perspective?
Google's buy companies. Yeah, they
Google seems always full of innovation. Is it actually that way when you're actually in Google?
I could talk about that for, I could fill up a whole day of a conference. To me, they are light years beyond anyone else. Like this program, like this GG program, I mean, other companies have tried to do that, or they do have their own version of that. But I mean, this is a globally connected network. You know, I mean, our group is literally going to be working on projects with Uganda, with Kenya. I mean, that's lined up. That's lined up right now. Information is shared across the globe. We get stuff right out of Silicon Valley. You know, there's guys in there working in the lab. They come out, they're like, hey, GDG organizers, take a look at this. You know, we do kind of like an alpha test, and they get immediate feedback. It's a really...
So Todd, I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that.
Yeah.
And as you know, you and I did a little bantering back and forth this week in talking about historically how Google gave employees 20% of their work life to work on innovation projects. But we see that that is even shifting now, and I'm wondering, is that because, they went public, they are accountable to the shareholders now? Is it time that they, do they need more scrutiny about where their employees are spending their time? Are they more accountable now than they would have been prior to going public?
I mean, there are a couple things that have shifted there. Larry Page left for a good 10 years, and there was a time, when he was originally there, one of the last things he did before he left, back in 2002, I think it was, he fired all of the project managers. Anybody who wasn't like a straight engineer was just laid off. Because the concept was, you can't, a non-tech can't manage a tech. That was the idea back then. And, during the time, his hiatus from 2002 to 2000, I think it was 10, this kind of really aggressive culture emerged. Everybody, you hear those things about like how Steve Jobs would run, and you come into a boardroom meeting and you had some kind of idea, and he'll just dress you down, if you didn't have like every detail figured out. It sounded like that mentality was there, and it was very like centrally controlled. He's come back. There's a whole new culture there now, and that's where things like Google Glass have emerged from that. Where there's a lot. It's a federated kind of model where there's a whole lot of autonomy given to a lot of different groups now. It used to be like Larry and Sergey, and then they would look. They were like micromanagers of everything that was going on across the whole product line, and that's shifted back now, where they're given a lot more autonomy, and there's a lot of really good stuff coming out of it. So to me, Google they've continued to keep it going. They haven't fallen into that cycle. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my impression.
Are they still doing the 20%, or I heard that they were?
20%. Yeah, I mean, they're going away from that. It's so new. I don't know what impact it's going to have. I don't know.
Yeah, well, now they call it Google X Labs, and it's a more structured environment. Not everyone is in Google X Labs, only a certain select group of employees, but it is their innovation arm, as you said. And we are seeing innovation coming out of that arm. So